Border Outpost Charlie had been under siege for 5 days. 12 soldiers, dwindling supplies, and 200 enemies closing in for the kill. Specialist Wong looked at his watch, 48 hours until reinforcements. His mission: convince 200 trained fighters that attacking this outpost would be suicide. The outpost was surrounded by enemy forces who had been probing defenses, testing response patterns, and counting muzzle flashes to determine American strength. Wong realized they had one advantage: the enemy couldn't see how few defenders were actually inside the wire. Time to make 12 soldiers sound like a company. Border Outpost Charlie occupied a strategic position along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border where intelligence operations, border security, and counterterrorism activities required constant American military presence despite the remote location and challenging tactical environment that made resupply and reinforcement operations extremely difficult under normal circumstances. The outpost consisted of hardened defensive positions including reinforced bunkers, observation towers, and defensive barriers designed to withstand small arms fire and indirect attacks while providing surveillance capability across key infiltration routes used by enemy forces moving between Pakistan and Afghanistan to conduct terrorist operations against coalition forces and civilian populations. Specialist David Wong served as the senior communications specialist and tactical coordinator for the 12-man garrison with expertise developed through specialized training in electronic warfare, tactical deception, and communication security that enabled complex operations in hostile environments where enemy forces maintained significant intelligence gathering and attack capabilities. Wong possessed 6 years of military experience including advanced certifications in signals intelligence, psychological operations, and tactical communications that qualified him for operations where communication security and deception were critical for mission success and personnel survival in environments where enemy forces actively monitored American communications and tactical patterns. The garrison's normal strength included 24 soldiers providing adequate defensive capability for routine border security operations, but personnel rotations, medical evacuations, and temporary assignments had reduced manning to 12 soldiers during what intelligence assessments classified as a period of reduced enemy activity in the border region. Border Outpost Charlie's defensive design enabled a full-strength garrison to maintain overlapping fields of fire, continuous observation coverage, and coordinated defensive operations against enemy forces numbering up to company strength. However, the reduced garrison created significant defensive vulnerabilities that enemy reconnaissance had apparently identified and was preparing to exploit. The outpost's strategic importance extended beyond local border security to include intelligence gathering operations, communication relay for special operations forces, and coordination of airstrikes against high-value targets throughout the region. Loss of the outpost would eliminate critical intelligence capabilities and create a significant gap in border security that enemy forces could exploit. Enemy forces in the region included experienced fighters with sophisticated tactical knowledge, advanced weapons including mortars and rocket-propelled grenades, and coordination capabilities that enabled company-level assault operations against fortified positions. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy strength had been increasing steadily over the previous month. Monday evening brought the first indication of enemy surveillance as Wong detected unusual radio traffic patterns and observation activities that suggested coordinated reconnaissance operations targeting Border Outpost Charlie's defensive capabilities, patrol patterns, and personnel strength through systematic intelligence gathering designed to enable assault planning. Tuesday morning at 0630 hours, enemy forces initiated coordinated attacks against Border Outpost Charlie using indirect fire and small arms attacks designed to test defensive responses while gathering tactical intelligence about American defensive capabilities, response times, and personnel strength through analysis of defensive fire patterns and communication intercepts. The initial attacks included mortar rounds targeting defensive positions, small arms fire from multiple directions designed to provoke defensive responses, and coordinated movement that indicated enemy forces were establishing positions for sustained siege operations rather than attempting immediate assault against fortified American positions. Wong immediately recognized the tactical pattern as reconnaissance by fire. Enemy forces were deliberately attacking to observe American defensive responses, count weapon positions, identify defensive weaknesses, and assess garrison strength through analysis of return fire patterns and defensive coordination that would enable planning for subsequent assault operations. Enemy tactical intelligence gathering included monitoring radio communications to identify unit strength and command structure, observing defensive fire patterns to count weapon positions and estimate personnel numbers, and testing response times to different types of attacks that would reveal defensive capabilities and limitations. The 12-man garrison implemented defensive procedures designed for full-strength operations, but Wang understood that enemy forces would eventually recognize the reduced personnel strength through tactical observation and communication analysis that would reveal the true defensive weakness of border outpost Charlie. Standard defensive doctrine required the garrison to maintain consistent defensive responses that would prevent enemy forces from accurately assessing American strength, but 12 soldiers couldn't maintain the response patterns that would normally be generated by 24 soldiers using standard tactical procedures and defensive positioning. Wang realized that conventional defensive operations would eventually reveal the garrison's reduced strength to enemy observers who possessed sufficient tactical knowledge to recognize defensive patterns that indicated understaffed positions. Enemy forces would identify this weakness and plan assault operations accordingly. Communication intercepts indicated that enemy forces were conducting systematic intelligence analysis of American defensive responses, suggesting sophisticated tactical knowledge and planning capabilities that exceeded previous threat assessments for irregular forces operating in the border region. By Wednesday morning, enemy pressure had increased significantly as hostile forces established positions closer to the outpost perimeter while conducting more aggressive reconnaissance activities that indicated preparation for escalated attack operations designed to overwhelm American defensive positions through coordinated assault. Wang's assessment of enemy tactical behavior suggested that hostile forces were planning a major assault operation timed to exploit their perceived tactical advantage over an understaffed American position that couldn't maintain adequate defensive coverage against coordinated attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Wang developed an innovative tactical deception plan designed to convince enemy forces that border outpost Charlie maintained full defensive strength despite the reduced garrison that had created vulnerabilities in defensive coverage and response capabilities that enemy reconnaissance was systematically attempting to identify and exploit. The deception strategy required creating the impression of multiple defensive teams operating from different positions throughout the outpost while maintaining coordinated defensive responses that would suggest full-strength garrison operations to enemy observers analyzing American tactical patterns and communication activities. Wang's plan utilized his advanced knowledge of enemy tactical analysis methods to create defensive patterns that would mislead enemy intelligence gathering while maintaining actual defensive effectiveness using available personnel position to maximize coverage and response capability despite numerical limitations that challenged conventional defensive doctrine. Primary deception techniques included rotating individual soldiers between multiple fighting positions to create the impression of larger defensive teams, coordinating defensive fire patterns that suggested multiple weapon teams operating simultaneously, and implementing communication procedures that would indicate full-strength unit operations to enemy electronic surveillance. The tactical deception required precise timing and coordination as Wang moved between 15 different defensive positions throughout the outpost, firing from each location in patterns that would suggest different soldiers operating distinct weapon systems while maintaining realistic defensive responses to enemy attacks and reconnaissance activities. Communication deception involved creating radio traffic that indicated full-strength operations including phantom unit check-ins, simulated coordination between multiple defensive teams, and tactical discussions that would suggest normal garrison strength to enemy forces monitoring American communication frequencies and analyzing unit strength through electronic intelligence gathering. Wang implemented sophisticated timing sequences that enabled him to maintain the illusion of multiple defenders operating simultaneously from different positions while ensuring that actual defensive coverage remained adequate for protecting the outpost against enemy attacks that could exploit gaps in coverage created by personnel movement. The deception plan required Wang to memorize complex movement patterns, timing sequences, and communication schedules that would create consistent tactical patterns suggesting full-strength operations while maintaining actual defensive readiness that could respond effectively to enemy assault operations launched against perceived American positions. Physical demands of the deception operation required Wong to maintain continuous movement between defensive positions while carrying weapons and equipment necessary for creating realistic defensive responses from multiple locations throughout the outpost perimeter over extended periods under combat stress conditions. Psychological aspects of deception operations required Wong to maintain multiple tactical personas that would create realistic communication patterns and defensive behaviors consistent with different soldiers operating from various positions while ensuring that enemy observers received consistent intelligence that suggested full-strength garrison operations. Wong's deception operations began with systematic rotation between 15 predetermined defensive positions that had been selected to provide overlapping fields of fire while creating the appearance of coordinated defensive teams operating throughout the outpost perimeter according to standard tactical doctrine for full-strength garrison operations. Position Alpha consisted of the main observation tower where Wong operated as the primary scout and coordination center, monitoring enemy activities while directing simulated defensive operations and maintaining communication with phantom units positioned throughout the outpost defensive perimeter according to standard operational procedures. Position Bravo included the Eastern Bunker system where Wong simulated heavy weapons operations including machine gun teams and mortar operations that would indicate significant defensive firepower position to counter enemy attacks from the most likely assault direction based on terrain analysis and enemy positioning patterns. Wong's movement between positions required careful timing to ensure that enemy observers monitoring American activities would receive consistent intelligence suggesting multiple soldiers operating simultaneously from different locations while maintaining realistic tactical coordination that indicated professional military operations. Equipment management became critical as Wong maintained different weapon systems and communication equipment at each position, enabling him to create realistic defensive responses appropriate for each tactical location while ensuring that enemy observers received consistent tactical intelligence about American defensive capabilities and personnel strength. The rotation schedule required Wong to spend predetermined time periods at each position while maintaining defensive activities that would appear normal to enemy observation. Movement between positions used concealed routes that prevented enemy forces from detecting the tactical deception while maintaining defensive readiness. Communication protocols required Wong to use different radio procedures and voice characteristics when operating from each position, creating the impression of multiple soldiers reporting to command while ensuring that enemy forces monitoring American communications received intelligence consistent with full-strength operations. Weapons positioning required Wong to pre-position appropriate equipment at each defensive location, enabling rapid transition between positions while maintaining the capability to provide realistic defensive responses using weapon systems that would normally be operated by different soldiers in full-strength defensive operations. Timing coordination required precise scheduling to ensure that Wong could maintain presence at critical positions during enemy attacks while creating the impression of coordinated defensive responses involving multiple soldiers operating according to standard tactical doctrine for outpost defensive operations. Enemy observation patterns required Wong to analyze hostile surveillance activities and adjust his deception operations to ensure that enemy intelligence gathering would receive consistent tactical information that supported the illusion of full-strength garrison operations while maintaining actual defensive effectiveness. Physical demands of multi-position operations required Wong to maintain continuous movement while carrying equipment necessary for realistic defensive responses, creating tremendous physical stress over extended periods while maintaining tactical awareness and defensive readiness throughout the deception operation. Wong implemented advanced psychological warfare techniques designed to create doubt and confusion among enemy forces while reinforcing the deception that border Outpost Charlie maintained overwhelming defensive strength that would make assault operations extremely costly and potentially unsuccessful against well-prepared American defensive positions. Audio deception involved creating sound patterns that suggested larger defensive forces including multiple vehicles, heavy equipment operations, and construction activities that would indicate reinforcement operations and defensive improvements that increased the tactical difficulty of successful assault operations against fortified positions. Visual deception included positioning equipment and materials to create the impression of significant defensive preparations including additional weapon positions, improved defensive barriers, and supply operations that suggested sustained defensive capability beyond what enemy forces had initially assessed during reconnaissance operations. Communication interception operations involved Wong deliberately transmitting misleading tactical information using encryption protocols that enemy forces could potentially decrypt, providing false intelligence about garrison strength, reinforcement schedules, and defensive capabilities that would influence enemy assault planning and timing decisions. Counter-surveillance measures required Wong to create defensive patterns that would mislead enemy tactical analysis while maintaining operational security for actual defensive capabilities and personnel strength that needed to remain concealed from enemy intelligence gathering operations throughout the siege period. Tactical misdirection involved creating false defensive priorities and apparent vulnerabilities that would channel enemy assault planning toward defensive positions where Wong could achieve maximum tactical advantage while protecting actual weak points in the outpost's defensive coverage that resulted from reduced personnel strength. Enemy psychology analysis enabled Wong to predict how hostile forces would interpret defensive responses and adjust deception operations to reinforce enemy assumptions about American strength while creating doubt about the probability of successful assault operations against apparently well-defended positions. Information warfare techniques included radio communications designed to be intercepted by enemy forces, providing misleading intelligence about American capabilities while creating the impression of coordination with supporting units that would arrive to reinforce border Outpost Charlie if enemy assault operations were attempted. Morale warfare operations involved demonstrating American confidence and defensive readiness through tactical activities that would be observed by enemy forces, creating psychological pressure that suggested assault operations would face determined resistance from well-prepared and adequately supplied defensive positions. Time pressure manipulation required Wong to create the impression of ongoing American operations and reinforcement activities that would suggest enemy forces faced a limited window for successful assault operations before American defensive strength increased beyond assault capabilities. Wednesday evening brought escalated enemy activities as hostile forces conducted aggressive reconnaissance operations including direct probing attacks against defensive positions, sustained indirect fire, designed to identify response patterns, and coordinated movement that indicated preparation for major assault operations against border Outpost Charlie. Enemy tactical intelligence gathering intensified as hostile forces implemented systematic approaches to assessing American defensive capabilities including monitoring communication patterns, analyzing defensive response timing, and testing defensive coverage through coordinated attacks from multiple directions designed to reveal garrison strength and positioning. Wong's deception operations faced increasing challenges as enemy pressure required more frequent defensive responses that could potentially reveal the limited personnel strength if tactical patterns became inconsistent with full-strength operations. Maintaining the deception required perfect execution under increasing combat stress conditions. Indirect fire attacks increased in frequency and accuracy as enemy forces adjusted targeting based on observed defensive responses, requiring Wong to maintain realistic defensive patterns while ensuring that actual defensive positions remained protected from enemy fire that was guided by tactical intelligence gathering operations. Enemy observation activities indicated sophisticated tactical analysis capabilities as hostile forces demonstrated knowledge of American defensive doctrine and recognition patterns that enabled identification of defensive weaknesses through systematic intelligence gathering and tactical assessment of American response patterns. Communication intercepts revealed that enemy forces were conducting detailed analysis of American radio traffic, attempting to identify unit strength and command structure through electronic intelligence gathering that could reveal the actual garrison strength if communication patterns became inconsistent with full-strength operations. Wong adapted his deception techniques to counter enemy intelligence gathering by creating more sophisticated communication patterns and defensive responses that would withstand detailed tactical analysis while maintaining actual defensive effectiveness using available personnel and equipment under increasing combat pressure. Physical exhaustion began affecting Wong's ability to maintain the complex deception operations as continuous movement between positions, sustained combat alertness, and equipment management created fatigue that could compromise tactical effectiveness and potentially reveal the deception to enemy observers. Sleep deprivation compounded operational challenges as Wong maintained defensive watches throughout the night while continuing deception operations that required precise timing and coordination to maintain the illusion of full-strength operations despite the tremendous physical and mental demands of solo tactical deception. Enemy forces demonstrated increasing confidence as their intelligence gathering apparently convinced them that assault operations could succeed against what they perceived as isolated American positions that couldn't receive adequate reinforcement due to tactical geography and enemy control of surrounding terrain. Thursday night represented the critical phase of deception operations as enemy forces completed assault preparations while Wang maintained intensive defensive activities designed to convince hostile observers that border outpost Charlie possessed overwhelming defensive strength that would make night assault operations extremely dangerous and potentially catastrophic for attacking forces. Night vision capabilities enabled Wang to maintain observation of enemy movements while conducting tactical deception operations under cover of darkness that provided concealment for movement between positions while enabling continued defensive responses that would reinforce the illusion of multiple defenders operating according to standard doctrine. Enemy night operations included infiltration attempts designed to gather close-range tactical intelligence about American defensive positions, testing defensive alertness and response capability while gathering final intelligence for assault planning that would commence if enemy commanders determined that American defensive strength could be overcome. Wang's night deception required enhanced tactical awareness as darkness created opportunities for enemy infiltration while limiting his ability to monitor hostile activities across the entire outpost perimeter. Maintaining defensive coverage while continuing deception operations challenged his tactical capabilities under extremely demanding conditions. Communication deception became more complex during night operations as Wang implemented simulated night defensive procedures including watch rotations, patrol coordination, and defensive positioning that would suggest full-strength operations to enemy forces monitoring American activities through electronic surveillance and tactical observation. Equipment management required careful coordination as Wang positioned night vision equipment, weapon systems, and communication devices at each defensive position while maintaining the capability to provide realistic defensive responses during potential enemy infiltration attempts or preliminary assault operations. Counter-infiltration operations required Wang to maintain defensive alertness while conducting deception activities, creating tremendous mental stress as he monitored enemy activities while simultaneously executing complex tactical deception that required precise timing and coordination throughout the critical night period. Physical demands reached extreme levels as Wang maintained continuous operations for over 72 hours while carrying equipment necessary for realistic defensive responses from multiple positions throughout the outpost perimeter under combat conditions that pushed human endurance beyond normal operational limits. Enemy pressure continued increasing as hostile forces demonstrated growing confidence in their assault planning while maintaining reconnaissance activities that tested American defensive responses and gathered final tactical intelligence before commencing major assault operations against border outpost Charlie. Dawn approached with enemy forces apparently completing assault preparations while Wang maintained intensive deception operations designed to convince hostile commanders that assault operations would face overwhelming defensive resistance from well-prepared American positions supported by adequate personnel and firepower. Friday morning brought Wang's most sophisticated deception operation as he created the illusion of reinforcement operations using carefully orchestrated activities designed to convince enemy observers that border outpost Charlie was receiving additional personnel and equipment that would transform the tactical balance against planned enemy assault operations. Audio simulation involved creating sound patterns that suggested helicopter operations, vehicle movement, and personnel activities consistent with reinforcement operations that would significantly increase American defensive capability beyond what enemy forces had planned to encounter during assault operations against the isolated outpost. Visual deception included positioning equipment and creating activities that would be observed by enemy reconnaissance, suggesting arrival of additional personnel and heavy weapons that would create overwhelming defensive advantages for American forces defending prepared positions against assault operations. Communication interception operations involved deliberate transmission of reinforcement coordination messages using encryption that enemy forces could potentially decrypt, providing false intelligence about arriving units, additional firepower, and expanded defensive capability that would make assault operations extremely risky. Movement simulation required Wang to create tracks and evidence of increased personnel activity throughout the outpost while maintaining tactical deception about actual garrison strength that would convince enemy observers that American defensive capability had increased dramatically overnight. Equipment positioning involved displaying additional weapon systems and defensive materials in locations where enemy observation would detect evidence of reinforcement operations while maintaining actual defensive readiness using available personnel and equipment under continued tactical pressure. Time pressure manipulation created the impression that enemy forces faced a rapidly closing window for successful assault operations as American reinforcements continued arriving and defensive preparations reached completion that would make the outpost virtually impregnable to assault by irregular forces. Enemy reaction to reinforcement deception indicated successful tactical manipulation as hostile reconnaissance activities decreased while enemy forces apparently reassessed assault planning based on intelligence suggesting dramatically increased American defensive capability that exceeded their assault capabilities. Command and control simulation involved creating communication patterns that suggested coordination with larger American units and support operations that would respond to enemy assault attempts with overwhelming firepower and tactical coordination that exceeded enemy capabilities for sustained combat operations. Psychological impact on enemy forces became apparent as hostile activities shifted from assault preparation toward defensive positioning that suggested recognition of unfavorable tactical balance and potential withdrawal from assault operations against apparently reinforced American defensive positions. Saturday morning revealed the full effectiveness of Wong's deception operations as enemy forces initiated probing attacks designed to test American defensive responses while avoiding full commitment to assault operations that their intelligence assessment suggested would face overwhelming defensive resistance from reinforced positions. The probing attacks enabled Wong to demonstrate apparently coordinated defensive responses using his multi-position techniques while creating the impression of overwhelming defensive firepower that confirmed enemy intelligence assessments about American reinforcement and defensive preparation that made assault operations tactically inadvisable. Enemy tactical behavior indicated successful deception as hostile forces demonstrated reluctance to commit to major assault operations while continuing reconnaissance activities designed to identify potential weaknesses in apparently strengthened American defensive positions that had been reinforced beyond enemy assault capabilities. Wong's defensive responses during probing attacks required perfect execution of his deception techniques while maintaining actual defensive effectiveness that could repel enemy assault operations if hostile forces decided to proceed despite apparent American defensive advantages created through tactical deception and psychological warfare. Communication interception revealed enemy discussions about tactical difficulties and potential withdrawal from assault operations due to unfavorable tactical balance created by apparent American reinforcements that exceeded enemy planning assumptions about isolated outpost defensive capabilities. Tactical intelligence gathered by enemy forces through probing attacks apparently confirmed their assessment of American defensive strength while reinforcing the deception that border Outpost Charlie possessed overwhelming defensive capability that would make assault operations extremely costly and potentially unsuccessful. Enemy coordination began showing signs of confusion and tactical disagreement as different hostile units reported conflicting intelligence about American defensive capability while unable to reconcile observed defensive responses with their original assessment of garrison strength and tactical vulnerability. Time pressure on enemy forces increased as their tactical intelligence suggested that American defensive capability continued improving while enemy assault options decreased due to tactical factors that favored defensive operations from prepared positions supported by adequate firepower and personnel. The psychological impact of sustained deception operations began affecting enemy morale as hostile forces apparently recognized that assault operations would face determined resistance from well-prepared defensive positions supported by adequate personnel and equipment that exceeded their offensive capabilities. Enemy withdrawal indicators appeared as hostile forces began repositioning away from immediate assault positions while maintaining surveillance operations that suggested transition from offensive to defensive posture based on recognition of unfavorable tactical balance against reinforced American positions. Sunday evening brought confirmation of Wong's tactical success as enemy forces completed withdrawal from assault positions while maintaining distant surveillance that indicated recognition of tactical disadvantage against apparently reinforced American defensive positions that exceeded their offensive capabilities for successful assault operations. Enemy communication intercepts revealed tactical discussions about unfavorable assault conditions and recognition that American defensive strength exceeded planning assumptions about isolated outpost vulnerability. Hostile commanders apparently concluded that assault operations would face overwhelming defensive resistance from prepared positions. Wang's 5-day deception operation had successfully convinced enemy forces that border outpost Charlie maintained defensive strength that made assault operations tactically inadvisable while concealing the actual garrison weakness that had initially made the outpost vulnerable to coordinated enemy assault operations. Intelligence assessment of enemy behavior indicated that hostile forces believed they faced a reinforced American position with overwhelming defensive capability supported by adequate personnel and heavy weapons that would make assault operations extremely costly and potentially unsuccessful against prepared defensive positions. The tactical deception had prevented enemy assault operations that could have overwhelmed the 12-man garrison while buying time for actual reinforcements that arrived Monday morning with full company strength that transformed border outpost Charlie from vulnerable position to secure defensive strongpoint. Reinforcement operations validated Wang's deception as arriving American forces found defensive positions and equipment arrangements that supported the illusion of sustained full-strength operations while actual defensive capability had been maintained by innovative tactical deception that exceeded conventional defensive doctrine. Wang received the Distinguished Service Cross recognizing his extraordinary tactical achievement and innovative deception operations that had saved 12 American lives while maintaining strategic control of critical border territory through individual expertise that exceeded conventional military tactics and demonstrated exceptional innovation under combat conditions. More importantly for Wang personally, every garrison member understood that their survival had resulted from one soldier's refusal to accept tactical disadvantage when innovative deception could provide defensive advantage through individual expertise and determination that exceeded standard military training and conventional tactical approaches. Wang's deception techniques became case study material for military intelligence and psychological operations training programs worldwide, demonstrating individual innovation and tactical deception capability that could overcome circumstances that appeared hopeless according to conventional military assessment and standard defensive doctrine. The successful defense of border outpost Charlie became legendary among American forces as an example of individual tactical innovation and psychological warfare that achieved strategic success through creative application of deception principles that exceeded enemy tactical analysis capabilities and planning assumptions. Wang continued serving in communications and psychological operations roles while training other soldiers in tactical deception and psychological warfare techniques that could provide tactical advantage when conventional approaches proved inadequate for mission accomplishment under extreme circumstances requiring extraordinary individual effort. Wang understood that his deception mission had demonstrated the practical application of psychological warfare and tactical innovation when soldiers depended on creative solutions for survival and mission success during operations where conventional defensive approaches couldn't provide adequate capability against overwhelming enemy strength. And that's Specialist Wang's Night Watchman story, the soldier who became an entire company to fool 200 enemies. Here at Last Signal Stories, we honor every warrior who fights impossible odds with courage and creativity. If this story of tactical deception, psychological warfare, and never giving up moved you, hit subscribe for more military stories. Drop a comment below, would you have attempted Wang's deception strategy? Until next time, stay tuned for the signal.